safe and enjoyable time last night. I had some friends in town to bring in the new year, so it was a lot of fun last night. We laughed, we cried, good tears, but because we were laughing so hard. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. So let's play a game really quick. Everybody raise their hand. Everybody raise their hand. It doesn't matter. All right. Who fell asleep before midnight? Oh no, put your hand down. Sorry. I played the game wrong. I'm sorry. All right, everybody raise your hand who fell asleep. All right, who fell asleep before midnight? Raise your hand. Okay, all right, that's all right. I was tired before midnight. Who fell asleep before 1? Okay.
Well, same people.
Same people.
All right, we're gonna move on.
Obviously you didn't get up.
Yeah, I didn't. I fell asleep way too late. Yeah. Some of you are more qualified to preach right now because of how much sleep I had. Man. Anyway, today we're going to talk about a subject that this time of year should be on our minds and should be in our life. And I really hope that you guys are blessed today. The reason, though, that I say should be is because a lot of times this time of year is stressful. Right? A lot of times we have money that's tight. Maybe people can't afford Christmas presents, but their kids just want so much. Maybe there's been a death in the family around this time, and so this time kind of reminds you of that. And sometimes it's not an occasion to be joyful, but we are going to talk about joy today. Christmas season sometimes lacks this, even though it is a very joyous occasion. And a lot of times it has to deal with the monetary and the socialness of Christmas. Because for us, sometimes it changes from the view of Christ coming and being born to that of material possessions. But today, I would actually like to challenge that belief that some of you might have, or maybe somebody you know has, that Christmas is not necessarily joyous. The Christmas season should be nothing but joyous. It's one of the best times of the year. And let me give you a verse that kind of highlights why there should be joy at all times. Not necessarily specifically in the Christmas season, but at all times. Let me share this with you. Romans 5:3-5 says this: "Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us." Rejoice in our sufferings. Tell me, do you guys suffer sometimes? Yes. Yeah, we all do. We all do. Does it happen during the Christmas time? You suffered before, during this time of year? And so, suffering happens no matter what season of life. And he just says we should rejoice in that suffering. We should have joy. Now, I sometimes try not to plan this, but every time Brian's in town, I always mention him. I don't know why, but that just shows how good of an influence you are on my life. So, he used to tell me, when we would depart from each other, he used to tell me to suffer well. I'm like, okay. You suffer too, buddy. Thanks. What type of dismissal is that? Suffer well. Yeah, suffer well, Kate. What do you say to that? I don't know. But I guess I could say the same thing. Thinking about it, though, it's really a good departure. Because those two words are actually profoundly recognizable in these verses. Because if we are to suffer, at least we should do it well, right? At least we should be joyful about it to the point that we are rejoicing in it because of its sanctification. Because of how our suffering shapes our character, how it molds us to be more like Christ. And so, suffer well is not something bad to say. It's just to say, hey, you're going to suffer, but you better do it well. You better rejoice in it. Now, Brian wasn't wishing suffering upon me. I mean, he's read the Bible before. He knows it's going to come anyway. But he's basically saying that this suffering is going to grow me. I'm going to be a better person. And if you read the scriptures, actually, this is, I use the word oxymoron. I don't know if it's that, but it's sort of throughout the scriptures, it says this a lot. It's like, rejoice in suffering. Why, God? Like, why would we ever rejoice in something that is so bad? Because when you're going through it, you don't feel joyful. You don't feel joy. But God tells us to do that, to grow in it. Because suffering is bad when you're in it. But on the other side of that suffering, it's so much better. Because God has grown you past that. Because as the scriptures say here, your suffering produces endurance. Why the word endurance? So that you could get through other sufferings. But it has to start with that joy. And then endurance produces character. Your character will eventually shape your sufferings because you know how to get through them because you are of that character now. And our character produces hope. We'll talk about hope later on. But where is joy in the Christmas and New Year's season? Where is joy during this time? Where is joy in the Christmas story? Right, you guys know the Christmas story. You know, the Savior of the world came down. He was born of a virgin, and he eventually grew up. Stuff like that. You know, that's the Christmas story, right? At its bare bones. And I want to talk about that, but we'll get to that. But first, I did want to have somebody from our own midst here give us a story of joy in the Christmas season. Because a lot of times joy comes from other people, and we feel joyful because of that. So I'm going to have Karen come up and share a story about joy during this time, how joy has helped her through the season.
So when Mike asked me to talk, I was like, oh, okay. And I'm like, joy in Christmas. What do I come up with that? And my mind automatically went back to when I was a little girl and I got this doll. And it was the greatest Christmas present ever. And then I thought, that's not really joy. That's just, I was glad I got a doll. And then I went right to the first Christmas where I had a job and I actually could buy presents for people. And I bought my dad this Silver Belly 20X beaver, like, killer cowboy hat. And it cost me like $1 million almost. And I bought myself a Christmas present, and I don't even remember what else I bought. And then I was thinking, that's not really joy either. That's just me spending my money. And so I was thinking about, well, there was the Christmas when Dave and I were first married, and we went to Walmart because it was the only place we could afford, and we bought this scruggly little tree, and the only thing we could afford to buy were these little gold balls and these little red apples and these little gold beads, and we had nothing that went under it, but we had this tree, and I was thinking, that's not really joy either. And so I was having a really, really difficult time coming up with this concept of joy because I wanted to center on happiness. And so at Christmas Day, I sat all my family down and I said, tell me your favorite joyful story. And they did, and they're like, why? And I go, because I have to come up with something to talk about, and I need some help here. And
Side note, I gave her a month to prepare because we canceled church twice.
Thanks. So, in the midst of all that, God remembered to remind me that, happiness is a choice, and joy comes from God. And you can still be unhappy with circumstances and still have joy in your heart. And I was reminded that after 10 long years of not having really hardly any contact with David's family, 2 years ago, we decided to go out for Christmas and spend some time with them. There's a lot of reasons why we haven't had contact with them, and if you want to know the story, I'll be happy to share. It's not like it's a secret, but it'll take too long here, and I don't have that much time. So we'll just say that it was a long time, and It was one of those situations where you never know how things are going to go. Is it going to be a great time? Is it going to be a bad time? Is everybody going to be nice and put on their happy face? And it was such a blessing to be able to reconnect with them and to be able to sit and laugh and share stories and not have any animosity or pain. And when I look back on that, my heart is truly joyful that we decided to take the time out of our life here and go and be with family that we hadn't been with in a very long time. And I think most of you know that David's mom is not doing well. Her cancer is progressed to the point where there's nothing that they can do except make her comfortable. And so now when I look back even more so, there's just more contentment, more feelings of peace that God has brought us to that, and that we're able to now have a really good relationship with his family. And so I think for me, when I think about Christmas and joy, I think about how God mended relationships and brought us to a much better place where he is the center of the relationship. And that's all I got for you.
Well, thank you. You can clap for her. Oh, I was supposed to put your name up. We were just like, oh, yay, there he is. See, but honestly, that brought me joy, just to hear that story. Because it's a story about family. It's a story about growth within the family. And it's a story that brought people together. And that's what the Christmas season is about. It is about joy. Joy is a good thing to have, guys. I promise you. It's not something that you should get rid of. I mean, if you're a Christian, it's part of the fruit of the Spirit, so you're supposed to have that. But that's another sermon. Other people's stories, though, can fill our heart with joy. And having a joyful heart is a great thing for you. And the scriptures actually talk about that. In Proverbs 17, verse 22, it says, "A joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones." Solomon, in his great wisdom, he feels the need to tell us that one of the best remedies in life is joy. One of the best remedies in life is joy. And you've had these moments before. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever had one of those moments where you were just sitting down or you're just down and sick and tired of life, but then something actually fills your spirits up with joy? Just something comes out of nowhere. And I'll give you a story. I'm not very joyful at work, okay? The reason being is because, Karen can attest to this, because she worked there for a little bit as well. I deal with a lot of cranky and upset customers on the phone that they don't get what they want sometimes, and so they call us to get what they want. And so sometimes they're very frustrated, and they really don't have a joyful heart. But I had one of those days at work the other day, and something actually brought me a little joy. It was a pretty funny story. So Sears, people at Sears, the representatives there, the people that work there, they call us a lot of times to help out with a customer in order to get their PIN number, their personal identification number. Basically, that means that they need that number in order to use the points that we have for our system. And so that is the majority of our calls for the one department that I work for. And so somebody called me that day, and they were like, "I have a Mr. Brown here, and he needs to speak to you about getting his PIN number." So I'm like, "All right, I'll be happy to speak with him." So hands over the phone. I'm in a pretty bad mood already. But let me tell you, my heart was filled with joy, because I was like, he gets on the phone, I'm like, "Okay, I'd be happy to help you with your PIN number. Can I have your phone number, please?" And her phone number brings up his account, right? And I said, "Okay, what is your name?" "Charlie Brown." And I'm like, that is the funniest thing ever. And it just brought brought me some joy. It like lifted up my spirits. Plus, it was only like 30 minutes until my shift was over. So it was kind of a good thing to end on. And it was really funny that his name was Charlie Brown. And sometimes I can't stand working on the phones. Sometimes I can't. But there are those times where a customer is actually joyful and not mean to you. Customer has a name like Charlie Brown. Like, that's awesome. Like, am I speaking to the Charlie Brown? And joy does that. It has the ability to completely change the mood of the room. It has that ability. Have you ever been with people, Karen and Dave were talking about this, where they laughed all night last night. And have you ever been with people where there's a story or a game or a joke that just brings joy out of you to start laughing? I'm telling you, I haven't laughed like I did last night in a long time. And that's because there's joy in that room. But also notice that Solomon says that our bones are dried if we have a crushed spirit. So think about it. Would you rather have crushed bones, dried up bones, or would you rather have a joyful heart that brings remedy to your soul, to your life? And this can happen actually from all around us. Like, people can drag us down. It does that. It dries up our bones. It crushes our spirit. But I pray that you guys have some joy in your life I actually battle that. Joy is a good combatant for you. They'll go to bat for you. Now, I was going to have Leland share a story, but he decided that he wanted a short sermon, so you guys can leave early. So he's not here. So I will tell a story from my life. Joy in my life has come up a lot recently. A lot. And it's specifically because of that. That is baby Anstead. I will not say the gender, so don't try to pop it out of me. Heather prayed specifically for this, that I would not accidentally speak the gender. But I got a good Christmas present. It was Friday the 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. We went to our last ultrasound to see baby. And, baby puckered the lips, and baby was squirming, baby was rolling around, and, that just brings joy to my heart, just sitting there, even seeing that. And it's great that we have that type of technology to actually see the baby. And that was the best Christmas present I had on the 23rd. Was able to see my unborn child, and I'm just so excited and so joyful. Yep, see, I'm still good. I haven't said it. You can applaud for me because I'm sure I should have screwed up already. Anyway, I'm just really, really joyful about this, and I know that I wish April was sooner. So that brought my heart full of joy. And it's interesting. There's an interesting verse actually. It kind of relates to this. I was like Googling something to relate to this. Google brought me to the Gospel of John, the 16th chapter, and so I did read the context. By the way, I didn't just Google a verse. But this was funny. Jesus says in the 16th chapter of John, when a woman is giving birth, she has sorrow because her hour has come. But when she has delivered the baby, she no longer remembers the anguish for joy that a human being has been born into the world. Now, I'm not even going to start imagining the intensity of pregnancy, and I'm sure I will witness it, but I will not feel it come April. But there's going to be joy on the other side. There's going to be joy on the other side, and not a lot of you were at my wedding, but I bawled when I was giving my vows and everything. I couldn't even speak. But I feel like I'm just going to do the same thing when baby is born. So I'm just very excited that I'm just so pumped. I can't wait for April. Anyway, let's move on. But there's actually, I don't know if you know this, there's another birth in history that gave us the most joyful of births. And that I was writing my sermon, I was like, that is the greatest segue ever. Because before you really start thinking about it, it's not your birth. It's not mine. It's the birth of Christ. And I don't know if you have in-depthly read the story of Jesus, but it doesn't stop at the birth. The Christmas season is often just about the birth of Christ. Sometimes we just speak about that. And there are people who knew that this was going to be the Son of God. You know, Mary was told by one of the angels that the Son of God was going to be born through you. But sometimes we don't understand the magnitude of the joy in this story. Because the birth of Christ is not just that part. Remember when we talked about how we are to rejoice in our sufferings? It's definitely hard, but do you know why the Bible actually talks about that? Because Jesus did. Because Jesus rejoiced in his sufferings. Christ was born for a reason, for a purpose. He was to live a life perfectly in human flesh so that he could be the perfect sacrifice to save you and me, to those who believe in him. A lot of times, again, we talk about Christ coming as a baby during this time, but we forget about the rest of his story. Because a lot of times we forget the reason he came. The reason is you and I. The reason was to save a people so desperately far away from God because of the sin in Adam, because we are sons and daughters of Adam. You all know the story. It's gruesome. You all know the story. Jesus suffered well for us. And I don't know how he considered that joy. But Hebrews 12:2 says this: in the midst of talking about a lot of people who have lived in the faith and have gone to the other side of that faith, it says this: looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne. I think joy is an odd word to us sometimes in this sense, because how can you have joy in that gruesome story? When you look at the cross and what Christ went through, it's hard to imagine that joy, but Christ saw joy because he knew what was on the other side. He knew that he was not only going back to his Father to sit at his right hand, but also that he was going to save you and I from the penalty of death. You and I would not be here if it weren't for Jesus humbling himself to become born of flesh and to die on the cross for you and me. That's the full Christmas story. Jesus was not just born to be born, to have God amongst us. He was born to abolish the sacrificial law and to appease that law. Now, today was short. You can blame Leland, but I forgive him. He's cool. I asked him like last week, so he probably forgot. It's all right. But I hope you were blessed by Kieran's story. I hope you were blessed by the scriptures. And I just wanted to leave you with a couple things to take away from this sermon. And I'm going to do that by asking us a question. How do we implement joy in our life? How do we implement joy in our life? I want to offer you two answers. And the first one might be a little odd. Optimism. Optimism. And I'm not trying to be a corny motivational speaker here. I'm not trying to be that person. But I want you to understand that I truly believe that optimism does go a far way. To have a little optimism in your life. The Bible really doesn't speak about optimism too much, but I would like to refer back to the passage that we talked about in Romans. Romans 5:3-5. Let me read it again. Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. Now, the reason why I quote this verse again is because it's very hard to rejoice in your sufferings if you don't have a little optimism that you're going to get through those sufferings. It's tough to have joy in those situations because you are not going to get through that if you don't understand that, hey, I can do this. And Paul says it plainly. He says, I can do this through Christ who strengthens me. And so with that optimism, we need to lean on God. Because the Bible clearly states that our understanding is not his understanding. His ways are higher than our ways. Because we need to understand, and I need to understand this, that the suffering that I go through, God is the one who brings me through it. God's sacrifice on the cross is the only way that I can actually have joy in those sufferings because Christ actually did it first. Remember that Hebrews verse? It says he's the author or the founder and perfecter of that faith. He perfected living through suffering with joy. So we got to look to him and have a little optimism. We've talked about this in life group a couple times. I'm a very optimistic person. I try not to keep myself down. And that's because I want to make sure that my life is hindered on the cross and joy. And I really hope that you feel that way as well. How do we implement joy in our life? Here's the last point, and then you guys can go nap. How do we implement joy in our life? Naps. Seriously, naps are joyful. But anyway. Hope. And on the surface, hope and optimism can sometimes be similar on the surface. But I want you to understand that I'm talking about the best hope. I'm talking about a specific hope. And this hope is the hope that Christ will eventually come back. So that we don't have to joy through our sufferings, because sufferings are no longer. Let me say that again. Christ is coming back so that we don't have to rejoice in our sufferings, because there's going to be no more sufferings. Romans 12:12 says this. Rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer. Man, that word constant is crazy. I don't know about you, but sometimes I get distracted with my prayer life, and it's just awful sometimes. But that constant is a good reminder that we just need to continually bring things to God. But it says, rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer, because Christ is coming back. As we are praying and as we fight through tribulation, we can have joy in the hope that Christ is coming back to stop all of that for us. Amen. And I hope you were deeply encouraged by that. Because honestly, the hope that I have in Christ coming back, that's joy. I can only think of joy, unspeakable joy, when I know and feel in my heart and have that hope that Christ will come back, he will return, and stop suffering so that I don't have to rejoice in them. But for now, we must constantly pray that we grow in our rejoicing in sufferings, because our character will be shaped. Christ is coming back. Can I have an amen on that? Amen. All right, let me pray, and then you guys can have a nap. Father, thank you so much for sending your Son so that we can experience the joy that he set before himself on the cross. We have the ability to experience Christ in a very real way, because he sacrificed himself for our suffering, for our sin. We deserve to be on that cross, and yet he came down from heaven, was born a baby, and died on the cross for us. But we rejoice in the hope that Christ is coming back, and that we don't have to rejoice in our sufferings any longer. When he comes back, he's stopping those sufferings. And I pray that if people are suffering here today, that if people don't have a lot of joy in their life right now, let them look to the cross. And even though it is gruesome, it is gory, it is violent, there's joy within that. Because Christ saw in front of him the fact that he was saving us from the penalty of death. Lord, be with us in 2017. I pray that this is a fantastic year, but not only it's fantastic for us, but that you're glorified through it. And Father, that you would grow us so that we can share you. I pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Have a good week.